The setting sun bathed the small Russian village in golden tones, reflecting the tranquility of an ordinary afternoon. The smell of fresh bread coming from the bakeries mixed with the scent of wildflowers that bloomed in the surrounding fields. For Viktor Petrov, that was the perfect scenario, because there was Anna, the woman who had stolen his heart from the first look. Viktor was not a man of many words, but alongside Anna, he seemed to find his own language, a language made up of looks, smiles and subtle gestures. They grew up together, playing in the streams and exploring the local hills. As teenagers, the innocent affection turned into something stronger. Now, as adults, they were inseparable. He was a robust young man, with dark hair and grey eyes like a stormy day, and she was delicate but determined, with long blonde hair and an intense shine in her eyes. One night, under a starry sky, Viktor took courage and held her hands. "Anna, if there was only one thing I could carry with me forever, it would be your love," he whispered. She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "Then never lose it, for my love is yours." They talked about the future, about building their own house and raising a family. They planned every detail, from the flower garden to the swing on the porch where they would watch the sunset together. But destiny had other plans, and the shadow of war was already approaching. The happy days seemed eternal, but reality imposed itself little by little. Rumors of war spread, and every day, more young people from the village received calls to serve in the army. Anna's heart sank with each news of an acquaintance leaving, and she feared that it would soon be Viktor's turn. One afternoon, while they were picking flowers in the field, Viktor watched her in silence, as if he wanted to engrave every detail of her in his memory. "Anna, if I ever have to go, I promise I'll come back to you." His words were firm, but his expression carried a shadow of uncertainty. She clenched her hands, trying to hide the fear that was growing inside her. "You promised never to leave me, Viktor, and promises must be kept." Those days were precious. They walked through the fields as if nothing could separate them. They shared dreams and hopes. They laughed, they cried, they loved each other intensely. Every moment felt like an unspoken goodbye, because deep down, they knew the inevitable was approaching. And then, the fateful day arrived. An official letter was delivered to Viktor's door. He knew before he even opened it. His fate was sealed. Anna saw the expression on his face change, and fear consumed her. "No, Viktor, please." His voice broke into sobs before he could continue. He hugged her with all the strength he had. "I need to go, my love, but I promise I'll come back to you, always." That night, they stood together under the starry sky, in silence. There were no more words, just the pain of imminent goodbye. When the sun rose, Viktor kissed her one last time before leaving, taking with him the love of his life and leaving behind a piece of his own heart. The promise of return still echoed in the air, but war was not kind to promises. The days that followed the arrival of the letter were filled with dense, crushing silence. Viktor held the paper between his fingers. Reading it out loud would make everything more real, and that was something he wasn't ready to face. Anna watched him with teary eyes, holding herself back from falling apart. I knew their fate had changed forever. "When are you leaving?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. Viktor took a deep breath before responding. "In 3 days, time cruelly slipped away. Every hour felt like a countdown to separation." They tried to act as if nothing was happening, as if the future they dreamed of was still possible. They walked through the fields, ate dinner by candlelight, and whispered words of love to each other, seeking comfort in the present, while the future was a distant promise. On the eve of departure, Viktor found Anna sitting on the porch swing, hugging herself. He walked over and pulled her into his arms. "No matter where I am, Anna, my heart will always be yours." She held his hands and handed him a silver locket. "I want you to take this with you. That way it will always be close to me." The next morning, the day dawned grey and cold. In the center of the village, other young soldiers said goodbye to their families. The looks were of pain, fear, and hope. Viktor held Anna in one last hug, feeling her body tremble against his. "Come back to me, Viktor." His voice broke as he spoke the words. "I'll be back, I promise." The train left, taking with it not only the soldiers, but the dreams and promises of a future that was now shrouded in uncertainty. The first days at the front were a mixture of tension and uncertainty. Viktor and his companions marched through devastated fields, past abandoned villages and landscapes ruined by war. The distant rumble of explosions served as a constant reminder of the danger that surrounded them. But, in the midst of the chaos, there was a relief: the letters. In rare moments of rest, Viktor would sit in the flickering light of a lamp and write to Anna. He described his conditions, always trying to minimize the horrors he witnessed. "My beloved Anna, I am fine. The days are difficult, but I think of you every moment. Your locket is always with me, as a reminder of what really matters. I hope you are safe and that, as you read these words, you feel how much I love you." Anna's answers were her source of strength. She wrote about the village, about how she spent her days trying to keep busy, so as not to succumb to homesickness. "Viktor, every day I go to the hill where we said goodbye. There, I close my eyes and imagine you by my side. I pray that you come back to me soon. Stay strong, my love." The letters were the only connection between them, invisible threads that kept a love threatened by war alive. However, as the months passed, the intervals between correspondence began to lengthen. The army advanced into more hostile territories, and conditions worsened. Viktor still wrote, but many letters never reached their destination. One night, under a starless sky, he received a shipment of late letters. Among them was one from Anna that made him cry silently. "Viktor, I haven't heard from you in weeks. The silence scares me more than anything. Tell me you're okay. I need to hear your voice, even if it's through paper. My heart awaits you." Anxiety tightened his chest. He took paper and pen and, with shaking hands, replied, "My Anna, I'm sorry for the silence. If you only knew how much I think about you. The days are cold and lonely, but your memory warms my soul. Don't let sadness take over you. Wait for me, I'll be back." However, deep down, Viktor was beginning to fear that he might not be able to keep that promise. The war turned out to be more cruel than Viktor could ever imagine. The smell of gunpowder and blood permeated the air, and the sound of gunfire and explosions was a constant reminder of the death that surrounded everyone. The days turned into an endless succession of forced marches, muddy trenches, and treacherous ambushes. The biting cold and hunger were constant companions, making each day a challenge for survival. Viktor struggled to maintain his sanity. The nights were the worst. I heard the groans of injured companions, the cries of despair of those who knew they would no longer see the light of day. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw the faces of fallen soldiers, friends who left without warning, victims of a merciless fate. And, in the midst of it all, he clung to a single thought: Anna. Whenever there was a moment of calm, he would take out the medallion she had given him and hold it tightly, as if that small object was capable of protecting him from the hell he was plunged into. "I need to go back to her," he repeated to himself. It was this promise that kept him standing, but the war was merciless. In a fierce battle at dawn, his battalion was surrounded. The soldiers fought with everything they had, but the number of enemies was overwhelming. Viktor saw friends fall one by one. He fired his weapon without ceasing, feeling his heart hammering in his chest, until an explosion threw him against the muddy ground. The world spun around him, and all he could hear was a deafening hum. When he regained consciousness, the battle was over, but the scene around him was pure horror. Bodies were scattered, and the few survivors were dragged away. Viktor tried to get up, but a searing pain shot through his body. His leg was bleeding, and he knew he couldn't keep fighting like that. He was found by a group of Allied soldiers, who carried him to a makeshift medical station. As they treated his wound, he felt reality crumble around him. The war spared no one. With each passing day, it became more difficult to believe that I would be able to return to Anna. He needed to write to her, needed her to know he was still alive. With shaking hands, he picked up a pen and paper and began to write. "My dear Anna, today I saw the face of death up close, but thinking about you keeps me going. The world here is cruel, but my heart still beats for you. If I ever can't go back, I want you to know that I loved you more than anything in this world. You were, and always will, be my light." He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to find strength. The noise of the wounded around him, mixed with the echo of the shots, still resonating in his mind. He knew that this was just the beginning of the hell he would face. The days following the battle were shrouded in pain and uncertainty. Viktor, still recovering in the makeshift medical station, felt his strength diminishing every day. Doctors did their best with the few resources they had, but the fever and infection threatened his life. He saw soldiers enter the tent and never come out again. victims of time and the neglect of war. Each night was a test of endurance. The biting cold invaded the tent, mixed with the metallic smell of dried blood. Moans of pain and whispers of farewell filled the air, making any rest impossible. Viktor held Anna's medallion tightly, as if it were enough to keep him alive. The only thing keeping him awake was the fear of never seeing her again. With great effort, he asked a nurse for paper and a pen. His hand shook as he wrote, but he knew he needed to do it. If his life was hanging by a thread, at least his last message should reach Anna. He began to draft words that, "I know I promised to come back to you, and believe me, I'm fighting with all my strength to keep that promise. But if I fail, if fate is cruel to me, I want you to know that I loved you until my last breath. I remember every moment by your side, the sound of your laugh, the warmth of your touch, our shared dreams under the starry sky. You were the light that illuminated the darkest days of this war. If I leave, don't let your heart drown in sadness. Live, Anna, live for both of us. With all my love, Viktor." He folded the letter carefully and handed it to the soldier next to him, whispering, "If I don't survive, take this to Anna." The man nodded, putting the paper in his coat pocket. Viktor closed his eyes, exhausted. The fear of never returning was real, but at least he had guaranteed that his last words would reach the woman he loved. Fate may be cruel, but is the strength of a promise enough to defy war? Viktor still has a way to go, and every decision could change everything. If you feel this anguish and want to know where this journey can take you, stay with me. Every second of this story holds something you can't miss. The morning came, misty and cold, a dark omen for what was to come. Viktor woke up with a start when he heard the officers calling. His body was still weakened, but the war waited for no one. He knew he couldn't afford to show weakness. He stood up, adjusted his dirty uniform, and gripped his gun firmly. That day's mission was risky, advancing over enemy lines to recover a strategic post. The soldiers were exhausted, their expressions reflecting the harsh reality of war. Viktor observed each of them, recognizing in their eyes the same fear that consumed him inside. The commander gave the last instructions, his voice serious and with no room for hesitation. "This position is crucial. If we fail, we will lose ground. We cannot afford that luxury." The group began marching through the dense forest, where snow covered the ground treacherously. The dry branches creaked under their cautious steps. Every movement seemed to echo in the oppressive silence. The sweat, mixed with the cold, formed a sticky layer on Viktor's skin. His heart was beating wildly, not because of the cold, but because of the uncertainty of what they would find ahead. Suddenly, a shot cut through the air, followed by a deafening explosion. Chaos ensued. The soldiers dispersed, seeking shelter behind logs and rocks. Screams of pain and confused orders mixed with the whistle of bullets. Viktor threw himself to the ground, feeling the impact of shrapnel flying around him. The smell of gunpowder and overturned earth permeated everything. He crawled over to an injured comrade, pressing down on the bloody wound as he whispered words of comfort. "Stay with me, you'll make it." But inside himself, he knew that few would come out alive. Enemy fire intensified, and retreat was not an option. With effort, Viktor stood up and moved forward. Every step was a bet against fate. He couldn't back down. His eyes searched the horizon, where the enemy post was located. If they could reach him, perhaps they would have a chance. But the line between hope and despair was thin. It was then that he felt the impact. A sharp pain shot through his body as a bullet hit his shoulder. He staggered, but continued. His feet stumbled in the red-dyed snow, his blood mixing with that of so many others. His locket clattered against his chest, a reminder of his promise to Anna. "I will come back to you." The sound of war seemed distant now. Everything became a blur of muffled images and sounds. He fell to his knees, his vision slowly darkening. His last thought was of Anna, of her promise, of the letter he had written. Time seemed to freeze. Would fate take him, or would there still be a miracle? The blood-stained snow was the only witness to Viktor's silent struggle against the darkness that threatened to overtake him. His body was weak, his breathing ragged. The cold bit into his skin, and the searing pain from the wound in his shoulder made every beat of his heart a painful effort. However, he could not fall there. He couldn't break his promise. Forcing himself to stand, Viktor leaned on the gun as if it were a cane, taking deep breaths to try and clear his mind. The sounds of battle still echoed around him, but everything seemed distant, as if he was trapped between life and death. he saw his companions fighting bravely, their faces smeared with mud and sweat, each carrying their own burden of fear and hope. From somewhere, a scream brought Viktor back to reality. The commander signaled them to advance. They needed to take the enemy position, or everything would have been in vain. Viktor clenched his teeth, ignoring the pain, and continued forward. Every step was a victory against imminent death. When they finally arrived at the strategic post, they were greeted by a hail of gunfire. The soldiers dropped to the ground, taking cover behind whatever cover they could find. Viktor smelled the strong smell of gunpowder and heard the sound of bullets ricocheting. Around him, he knew this was the decisive moment. With a last bit of strength, he stood up, aiming with precision. The shot echoed, and one of the enemies fell. His companions, motivated by the act of courage, advanced with renewed fury. Shouts of orders were given, and the enemies, surprised by the momentum of the offensive, began to retreat. But war did not allow for heroes without scars. The moment Viktor turned to check on his companions, he felt a sudden blow to his chest. The impact threw him backwards, his eyes wide in shock. He fell into the snow, feeling the heat of blood spreading rapidly. His gaze was lost in the grey sky. The pain was intense, but his mind was no longer there. He saw Anna, his smile, his touch, the promise he had made, the letter, the last letter. The desire for his words to reach her now was all he had left. His vision became blurred, and an unknown cold began to envelop him. The sound of battle became a distant whisper, and then silence took over. The battle was over, but the battlefield still breathed the tragedy that had unfolded. Bodies lay in the snow, the hot vapor of blood dissipating in the biting cold. Survivors walked among the fallen, looking for familiar faces, calling out to comrades who might never respond again. In the midst of this devastating scenario, Viktor lay motionless. His body was without strength, and his mind oscillated between the present and distant memories. He no longer felt the pain, just a growing numbness that pulled him into a bottomless abyss. His gaze remained fixed on the grey sky, but in his heart, he was far from there. I was at home, with Anna. The sounds around him seemed muffled, as if the world was receding from him. He heard voices, hurried footsteps, a distant call. Someone knelt beside him, touching his face gently. "Viktor, hang in there, buddy." The voice sounded desperate, but he couldn't respond. Soldiers carefully lifted him and began carrying him to a makeshift medical station. Every movement made his body protest, but he no longer had the strength to react. His thoughts, however, were still stuck on Anna, on the promise he had made, on the letter that might never reach her hands. As he was carried through the snow, a thought echoed in his mind. Does she still wait for me? The last thing he felt before he lost himself in unconsciousness was the locket attached to his chest, the last link between him and his eternal love. The snow slowly melted as the weeks passed, but Viktor's absence remained like an eternal winter in Anna's heart. The days became an agonizing wait, filled with silent prayers and constant glances at the horizon, hoping to see their loved one return. Every knock on the door made her jump with hope, but it was always someone from the village, bringing news that had nothing to do with him. However, on that grey afternoon, something different happened. A soldier, wearing a worn and dirty uniform, walked towards his home. Anna felt her heart sink. Her instinct told her that he brought something important, perhaps the answer she feared so much. The man removed his cap, revealing a young and haggard face, marked by the weight of stories he preferred not to tell. "Are you Anna?" he asked, his voice hoarse from the cold and wear. She nodded, unable to speak. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a stained envelope, crumpled by time and the difficult journey. "Viktor asked me to give this to you in case he didn't come back." Anna felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. His vision blurred, and his shaking hands hesitated before picking up the letter. The world around him seemed to have stopped, as if that moment was eternal. She couldn't hear anything other than the sound of the paper crumpling between her fingers. The soldier lowered his head. "He fought until the last moment. He never stopped talking about you. Until the end, he believed you would come back. I'm so sorry." The wind blew hard, making the hem of Anna's coat flutter, but she didn't move. She couldn't respond. His lips parted, but no words came out. The pain in her chest grew like a storm that threatened to destroy her. His heart refused to accept the reality that letter carried. With a tentative movement, she opened the envelope and carefully removed the folded paper. Viktor's shaky letters were a testament to the struggle he put into writing them. His eyes began to scan the words, and each sentence stuck like a blade into his soul. My beloved Anna, if you are reading this letter, it means I failed to keep my promise. And that is the greatest pain I carry with me, more than any wound from war. I wanted so much to come back to you, to feel the warmth of your embrace, to see your smile light up my life. But fate, cruel as always, separated us before our time. I want you to know that I fought until the last moment with the hope of seeing you again. It was your love that gave me strength, your memory, that kept me standing on my hardest days. The war may have taken my body, but my heart will always be yours, always. I don't want your life to stop because of me. I know asking this is unfair, but I want you to be happy. Anna, live, love, find reasons to smile, even if I'm no longer there to see it. You are strong, and the world needs your light. If you ever look at the sky and feel the wind touch your face, remember me. I will always be by your side, in every breeze, in every star that shines in the night. With all the love a man can carry, Viktor, tears fell uncontrollably down Anna's face. She held the letter to her chest, as if it could bring him back. The pain was unbearable, but next to it, there was something else. The love that Viktor had left, eternal and immortal, like the words that now burned in his heart. She looked up at the cloudy sky, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to feel the wind touch her face. Time seemed to have stopped. Anna held the letter delicately, as if the simple touch could tear it apart. The paper, stained by time and the difficult journey it took to reach his hands, carried Viktor's last words. Your heart beat wildly as your eyes ran over each line, absorbing each word as if they were the last you would hear from him. Silent tears slid down her face, falling onto the paper. The weight of the loss was overwhelming, but at the same time, something inside her seemed to spark. The pain mixed with the love that still pulsed inside him, a love that Viktor assured would never die. His words echoed in his mind, a whisper from the past that insisted on remaining present. She reread each line, absorbing the deep meaning of each sentence. Viktor hadn't just written a goodbye, he had left a testament of love, a request for her to continue living, smiling and lighting up the world as she always had. In the midst of the pain, there was a silent promise, a commitment he asked her to honor. Anna closed her eyes for a moment, trying to find strength in those words. The wind blew gently, and for a moment, she felt as if Viktor was there, beside her, holding her hand as he had done so many times before. The smell of the earth, wet with melting snow, the distant sound of the stream that ran at the bottom of the village, everything seemed to bring back his memory. The silence of the house weighed on her, filling every corner with his absence. He walked to the fireplace and sat down in front of the flickering fire. There, in the warm light of the flames, holding the letter to her chest, she whispered, I will miss you every day, Viktor, but I promise I will live. And at that moment, something changed inside her. The sadness didn't disappear, but it transformed into something different. The love Viktor had left was not a burden, but a gift, a reminder that as long as she lived, he would never be forgotten. She took a deep breath, carefully folding the letter and placing it in the locket Viktor had given her before leaving. That was his most precious treasure, a memory he would carry with him forever. The door creaked in the wind, and Anna got up, walking to the window. The snow continued to fall slowly, covering the village in a silent, white blanket. She knew that life would move on, and although Viktor was no longer physically there, he would always live inside her. That night, for the first time in a long time, Anna fell asleep peacefully, holding the locket between her fingers, feeling Viktor's presence in every beat of her heart. The days that followed were shrouded in painful silence. Anna woke up every morning with the feeling that Viktor was still there, as if at any moment he would walk through the door with his calm smile. But the reality was different. The bed next to her was empty, and the only presence left of him was the letter neatly folded inside the locket she kept on her chest. The village continued its routine, but for Anna, time seemed to have stopped. She avoided going out, fearing the pitying looks of her neighbors. Every corner of the house whispered memories. Every object brought back shared moments. The smell of the tea they used to drink together. The sound of the wind hitting the window like the nights he hugged her to keep her warm. Everything became a painful memory. One afternoon, sitting on the edge of the hill where they had said goodbye so many times, Anna allowed herself to cry without reservation. The strong wind ruffled her hair, and the tears flowed without her trying to contain them. Her chest hurt, as if a piece of herself had been ripped away along with Viktor. She remained there for hours, staring at the horizon, wondering if he could somehow still see her. "Are you watching me now, Viktor? Do you feel me the way I feel you?" Silence was his only response. The days turned into weeks, and the pain persisted. But amid the sadness, something began to change. Anna began to visit the village more, helping those who, like her, had also lost someone in the war. She wiped the tears of mothers who didn't receive their children back. She held the trembling hands of widows who, like her, needed to find the strength to carry on. And, little by little, he realized that the pain didn't just have to be a weight. It could be transformed into something more. The love that Viktor had left should not imprison her in eternal sadness, but rather inspire her to continue. One night, sitting again in front of the fireplace, Anna opened the locket and took out the letter. She read each word slowly, feeling the weight and beauty of what Viktor had left for her. "Live, Anna, live for both of us." It was a plea, a request that she not sink into darkness. That night, she decided she wouldn't let the pain overcome her. If Viktor fought to the end, so would she, but for a life that honored their love. Anna's decision that night didn't erase the pain, but it transformed it. Grief still accompanied her, but now it walked beside her. Instead of imprisoning her, she wouldn't forget Viktor. She never could, but living would be her way of honoring him. In the following days, Anna began to go out more, to talk more, to allow herself to feel the world again. She began visiting the village not only to offer solace, but to find her own path. Sharing grief with other widows and bereaved mothers created a silent bond between them, a deep understanding of the pain they all carried. She found purpose in working in the village infirmary, helping to treat the wounded returning from the front. Every bandage, every word of comfort he offered felt like he was doing something for Viktor, something he would have supported. In every suffering look of a returning soldier, she saw echoes of the war that took him. But she also saw survival, resistance, and that was what she chose to nurture within herself. Mornings were no longer just a reminder of Viktor's absence, but an opportunity to continue his story in some way. The locket with the letter still hung on her chest, but now, instead of weighing her down, it seemed to guide her. One day, while walking through the village, a small child grabbed the hem of her skirt. The big, innocent eyes stared into yours, seeking comfort. Without hesitation, Anna bent down and smiled. "It's going to be okay," she said softly, feeling the impact of her own words. And for the first time, he believed them. In the evening, when she returned home, she sat by the fireplace, where she was so often lost in memories. But now, instead of opening the letter once more, she picked up a new piece of paper. His fingers hesitated for a moment, but then he began to write. "Viktor, today was a difficult day, but I did it. I smiled, I helped someone, and I know that wherever I am, you would be proud of me. You are still with me, in every step I take, and I will continue, for both of us." She folded the letter and placed it next to his. It wasn't goodbye. It was a continuation. The years passed like leaves in the wind, carrying with them raw pain, but leaving a trail of memories. Anna found a new way of living, but she never forgot it. The war had ended, the village had rebuilt, and life took its course, as it always does. But Viktor's name continued to be whispered in his heart every dawn. She remained in the village, dedicating herself to working in the infirmary, helping those who needed care. Her soft touch and gentle words brought comfort to the hurting, and many believed it was a gift, but she knew the truth. It was the love that Viktor had left him, transformed into strength and compassion. Over the years, many things have changed. The children she watched grow up now walked through the village as adults. New stories emerged and old wounds healed. But for Anna, Viktor was never really absent. His love was not a painful ghost, but rather a constant presence, a gentle breeze on quiet afternoons, a ray of sunshine that touched his face on winter mornings. On the anniversary of his farewell, Anna climbed the hill where she had waited for him so many times. Time had changed the landscape, but the essence of that place remained the same. She sat down on the grass, feeling the wind blow, and closed her eyes. "Viktor, I lived. I smiled. I did what you asked me to do." She took out of her pocket the letter she had written to him years ago, already yellowed with age, and opened it. reading her own words as a testimony of the journey she had traveled. His eyes filled with tears, but they were not of sadness, but of gratitude. She had loved, suffered, and most importantly, carried on. With a serene smile, Anna released the letter into the wind. The paper danced in the air, slowly rising towards the sky, as if it were being carried to meet Viktor. She remained there for a long time, watching until the letter disappeared into the immensity of the horizon. And then, with a light heart, she went down the hill, ready to continue living, knowing that love never fades. He just transforms. Years passed, and the village continued its cycle of life. But for Anna, the past and present were intertwined in a way that time could never erase. Now, with silver hair and slower steps, she still carried with her the memory of Viktor, not as a weight, but as a gentle flame that brightened her days. The medallion he had given her, always kept close to her heart, was a reliquary of everything they had experienced. She was still, walking through the hills, feeling the wind touch her face the same way it did so many years ago. It was as if, in every breeze, Viktor was there, whispering his name. Sitting on the porch of her house, watching the sunset dye the sky with golden and reddish tones, Anna reflected on everything she had experienced. Viktor's love never faded, it just changed shape, becoming part of her. He was in every decision he made, in every gesture of kindness, in every smile he offered the world. She took a notebook and, with steady hands despite the time, wrote the last words of that story. True love never dies. It crosses time, overcomes absence, and remains alive in every memory, in every sigh of longing, in every promise fulfilled. Viktor, I lived for us, and one day, I know we will meet again. Until then, you will live in me. When he finished, he closed the notebook with a serene smile. He had kept his promise. He had lived. The wind blew gently, carrying with it the certainty that some souls are linked forever, beyond time, beyond life. And Anna, with a calm heart, watched the night fall, knowing that love never dies. It only transforms, becoming eternal. If this story touched your heart, we want to know your opinion. Leave a comment saying, "True love never dies," and share your emotions about this exciting journey. If you believe in the power of stories and the impact they can have, subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications. This way, you will continue to follow intense stories, full of emotion and meaning. Share this video with someone who needs to feel this message. The love and stories that inspire us must be carried forward. Each story teaches us something new, and the next one will bring a lesson as profound as this one. Unexpected moments, decisions that change lives, and emotions that mark us forever await you. Stay tuned, as the next journey is already being written.